So today we'll be looking into the Constitution of India and the important British Indian Acts which were making a payment for the formation of the Constitution. So what is a constitution? Constitution is a fundamental principle. Fundamental is like very adequate. Adequate principle which tells the government. Government includes everyone whom we have voted and selected. It is just not chief minister or a prime minister. Have that in mind. Government includes all the people we have voted and chosen. So a group of people whom we have voted and chosen is called a government. A CM alone is not a government. All the MLAs together, all the MPs together, everyone together is called a government. So government is a governing body of the state. So this governing body of the state is being given principles by the constitution for governing the state. So constitution gives the adequate principles required for the government to govern a state. I think it's clear now. And the idea of constitution was given by M.N. Roy. It was Ambedkar who wrote it. That's different. But the idea, the primary idea which was given, it was given by M.N. Roy. He drafted the first Constitution of India and he published it for public discussion. So who is M.N. Roy? He was a very important person in the Communist Party. So he was the head of the Communist Party in India and he was imprisoned in India. And later on, when he came out of the prison, he was asked by the Indian Congress to join their party, and he was there in Indian National Congress. But there was always a clash between the ideologies of Gandhiji and M.N. Roy. Like M.N. Roy wanted violence, but Gandhiji wanted non-violence. So he was thrown out of the party. No, like he came out of the party, I think. So he came out of the party, and he was making all the communist propagandas outside. So he was a very important communist member, and he was the one who made Marxism and communism gather support in India. So next, we're going into the important acts which are made, and these acts were the adequate requirements for the formation of Constitution of India. So during the year 1773 to 1875, a lot of important events were happening in British India because the British government were making a lot of rules and acts to make British rule this Indian soil. So they were making a permanent change so that they can become the governing body of the Indian soil. And all these events and acts gave way, like they made an ideal foundation for the development of a separate constitution for India. And let's begin with the year 1773. The first Regulation Act of 1773 was passed by the British government. What it quoted was that the governor of British India, there were a lot of governors during that time, and the governor of Bengal, like there was a governor of Bengal, and for the first time, the governor was made the governor general. So the governor of Bengal was promoted to the status of Governor General of Bengal, and under him came the presidencies of Bombay, Calcutta, and Madras. So these were like very important ports. Madras, Bombay, and Calcutta were very important ports for the East Indian Company, from where all these sales were happening. So they were like exporting and importing products from this place. So all these presidencies were brought to his controls. The governor of Bengal was promoted to the governor general status, and all these presidencies like Madras, Bombay, and Calcutta came under his control. So the first Regulation Act of 1773 was mainly made for the controlling purpose. So it wanted to control the affairs of the East India Company. They wanted to know what was coming in and what was going out of the country. So all these presidencies of the important ports were brought under control of a single person. And that person, who was the Governor General of India for the first time, was Lord Warren Hastings. And the Regulation Act was also made for the purpose of setting Supreme Court of India. So all these people were coming into the scrutiny of law for the very first time. And the government servants of the company were prohibited from accepting any private trades. Even now, no government persons are like allowed to take any private trades or bribes. And this was for the very first time it was set up during the year 1773 under the Regulation Act. So no government servants are allowed to make any private trades or accept bribes from the natives of the Indian land. So after 10 long years, the British government is making yet another important act for the Indian soil, and that was the Pitt's India Act of 1784. The government wanted to control the East India Company even more now. So they're making this act, And under this act, there was a board of control which was implemented for the first time for the company. And this board of control had 6 members. 2 were from the British cabinet and 4 were from the Privy Council. Privy Council was a very important concept for the England, because even from the 11th century, we can see that these kings and queens had a privy council which was giving a lot of advice to the kings and queens. So, if the king or the queen of England wanted a advice, or they wanted a solution, they always go to these members of this privy council. So, they are bringing these members of the privy council directly into control for the Indian soil. So, the very important act of Pitt's India Act of 1784 is very important for the implementation of Board of Control for the company. So after 10 more years from the Pitt's India Act, the government is making yet another act, and it's called the Charter Act of 1793. So first, the British government is coming in. It's setting up a company, and then it is taking over the control of the presidencies. And indirectly, it means like they are controlling all the important ports of India. And then they are making law. So they are bringing in law and regulations of the British government into Indian government. And now, through this Act, Charter India Act of 1793, they are taking control of the revenue. So even the money matters of the Indian country is being taken care of the British government from now on. So this act makes the entry of British into the Indian revenue system, and it is mandating that the salaries of the Indian staffs who are working in the East India Company or in the legal departments which are taking control of the legal formalities of the Indian country, or the board of control members who were appointed by the government 10 years ago, has to be given salary from the Indian revenue itself. So the Indian revenue matters are being controlled by the British government from now on. So after 20 long years of first Charter Act, which took care of the revenue system of the country, now they're making this Charter Act of 1813 for the educational improvement of the country. So they're taking care of the court, they're taking care of the legal systems, they're taking care of the revenue. Now they are taking care of the educational affairs of the country, because very simple, they wanted workers for their company, and they wanted workers for their administration of India. Now that the government is like administering all over India, they wanted educated people for it. So they're making a grant of 1 lakh through this Charter Act of 1813 for the educational improvement of the people of India. And they were also having these IAS officers from then on. So for the administrative office affairs, they wanted educated people to get into it. So they're making this improvement for the educational system of India. And the East India Company was then having all the monopoly for trade, but now it is making into like getting itself into a governing body of the state. So after 20 years from the Second Charter Act, the Charter Act of 1833 is being passed, and in this Charter Act, like almost the British government has almost taken care of everything now: revenue, legal, financial, and everything. So now they wanted to make a centralization of power for India, the whole of India. There were a lot of governors, a lot of governor generals then on, but now they wanted a governor general for India, a centralized person under whom all these governors were coming in. So the first Governor General of India was Lord William Bentinck, and the Governor General of India was given all the legislative, administrative, and financial powers by the British government. And these governors, all these small governors who were there, they lost all these powers from then on. So there was only like centralized power, and these people lost all the legislative powers from then on. So after the third Charter Act, it is becoming a centralized power. So East India Company has become a centralized power now, and they are making a face, and they are like representing a face as a British government in India. So they are the face of British government's political power in India, and now they are making a commission, and that's called a law commission. And it is set up by the East India Company. So the first law commission was set up by East India Company under the supervision of Lord Macaulay. Lord Macaulay was also the president of this commission, and he was the brainchild. So Lord Macaulay is a very important person in the Constitution of India, because he was the brainchild of the Penal Code of India. So he formed the Penal Code for India even now, which we follow. So after 20 long years, the Fourth Charter Act of 1853 was being said by the government, and this act is very important because it had a lot of rules and regulations, new rules and regulations for the country through this Charter Act. And the British government made a separate governor for Bengal alone through this Charter Act. and the legislation was treated as a separate power for execution. So laws were made different, laws were made compulsory, and laws were to be treated with separate power. And for the first time, competitive exams were introduced in the Indian soil. And there were a lot of educated people now. There were also people who got their education from England itself. And these people got their education from England to become to become IAS officers, obviously, for the Indian soil. And this competitive exams concept was first time introduced in the Charter Act of 1853. And the Code of Directors were first introduced with 18 members, and from these 18 members, 6 were to be suggested by the Crown. So the British Crown itself suggested 6 members, and the British Crown extended the company's rule without stating any time limit. And the natives were to be included in the Legislative Council. So the Legislative Council of the country had they had members of the Indian people also, and the British Crown gave these important rules through this Charter Act of 1853. So until now, we saw the company's rule. So there was British government, but it was executing everything through the face of East India Company. So in the next chapters, in the next years of which followed from 1857 to 1943, almost until independence of India, the crown took its power in India, and everything was coming under the crown's rule. So in the next episode of classes, we'll be seeing about the acts which are passed during the crown's rule in India. Thank you guys. Do share, subscribe, like, and comment, and do support us. Thank you.